reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says...
Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's a... Is it a MOBA? Crypto is... Sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira.
Views about what? Like, you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. And
figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already, even leading up, like CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but like already, like a day before, appreciate your transparency, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no, it's sort of like hard. You kind of have to disprove every single, like there's always a new like health guy telling you that there's some new alternative discovery, whatever. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And I was like, why do they? It was a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Shocking thing. And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in
your hands in both pockets? But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party. So before, it's like, if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all, and it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, there was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. Everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now, eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all that might be one of the first, like, trillionaires or whatever, like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, like be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at like 5 p.m. How free are you really? Like, you're just like, I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud, where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer, Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of 2 Harvard lawyers. You can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games, and that's why I lost the money.
But they have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these, like you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like, it wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over.
Whoa.
Like, right, people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated. In the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and how you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He's found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your success. And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, this big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but you know, right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west person in the space, to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, you know, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
so the person's not named in the report who is donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami, but that person eventually.
The fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse, the things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish.
Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people, because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is
down, because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly. It was like 70,000 or something like
60
that.
plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
Reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to. He'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to give, it's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. And that video has aged so well, because it's like, people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud, like Mark Cohodes. He's a famous short seller. He was, or you were a grandma who just put 1 Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, they just withdrew until nothing was roll. You think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. Now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, to Republicans. And part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his launches, FTX, in 2019. And that's a crypto platform where, honestly, you can make a lot more money than just with a trading firm. So FTX quickly skyrockets in popularity. After the fact, he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre to do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, or, something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're a bunch of ads, like get-rich-quick schemes. Like, you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis, telling you, they're like 25 years old, telling you, you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. And then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. Make something work. If it's going to go to the public, You have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot, I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt. And he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative with regulators. They were all trying to – Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this, like, battle between them. And ultimately – so we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent. Get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like – he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes – no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time, broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? It just he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have
you put $100,000 into this little mixer, and then it sends $100,000 out later, and nobody knows where that money came from.
What is a mixer? How does it work?
It's interesting. So the most famous example is Tornado Cash. He's like, well, like think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. Nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this back door or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house, like, reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew. Like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out? And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is money and go start trading with it unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. Something because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why are to expose? But like, I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about Thor. And like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. Money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable rich of that token. Then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through who's this thing. So all this money's going in. And then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time assets, you can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right. And then when you have them on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy, we'll restructure the company, we'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new.
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? How does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
Really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there, and all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like,
"What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So
Yeah,
how does that work?"
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
there were things that were coming out, like questions about, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. FTX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like it was very opaque. What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace. I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started, but it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all the
party.
That's right, but
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah,
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like his whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet. And he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called, he thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was,
initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money. So it looks like, if you just look at their assets, it looks like they're covering their liabilities. They owe customers $10 billion. Looks like they have $10 billion, but like ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. You can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put it, fight, like one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, it means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your.
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, I started hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is not, and it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill like was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly like I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too. Lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. there's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams. Annoying. So
we don't need that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America, and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're a publicly traded. The account fiat at FTX, and so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured.
It wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking.
He's the son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out this stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. You know, for one of the first times, it was kind of basically screaming about, you know, all these scammers online. And unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten sort of, this is a fraud because, you know, no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. Middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you wanted to basically influence politics by just donating, and the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you're
involved in what you do,
it's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019, went from the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's almost to something worse. There are dark where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. Like it's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane. But it's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto, because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, or system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX. They could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Whoa.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to.
Analogy for losing your house?
You know what's funny? Yeah.
You know, I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address, because you send it to a different one. Around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. So he called it fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled, not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became
regulators. When he was trying to impose regulations or encourage regulations, how could that have benefited him as opposed to Binance? Like, what could they have possibly done to make it easy?
Yeah, tokens is the individual. You can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. Like, they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX. Wow. Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance?
Money system. I mean, yeah, especially in our modern age. I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from. The average person, very treatable kind of cancer, and she's fine. But at the time I watched her as she's like, gets this diagnosis, gets swept up with all these hucksters who are telling her that the way to treat thyroid cancer company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame onto Alameda and I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore service that said, you cannot move, when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? To their other friends, they're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people do this stuff, and you start to have repeat occurrences, I just cover stuff all the time, and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago, I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at, and he said, these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? So by the third interview, I'd studied him, and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of, I didn't really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs. Multi-level marketing, sort of just hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these get rich seminars. All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other being like, well, that guy did it. What? It's the hottest deal, which thankfully she did. And she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense, but on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange. There's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of how the whole scheme worked. The problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral.
And a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could
collateral dollars or some asset. We'll give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin. And that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. They're setting it up with I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's there were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted. There's some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it. And nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing
executives, Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam. You have $1, I'll let you trade with $100. And that's going to be one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are actually campaign finance laws I've heard are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. But it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's a
whiz kid who you listen to him talk. He has an answer for everything. He's so articulate. He's so knowledgeable. I listened to previous interviews before he got busted.
Everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. But he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey, and I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up, or we're going to sue you.